Hello, my name is Roy. It was a winter's night. Me and 3 other people were invited to spend the night in a room that had a prize for just staying there. It was a very attractive idea, as we were sent links of photos and videos of the room. It was just an ordinary room with no crazy stuff in there. First I was wondering, would there be saws and torture equipment in there like the movie Saw? But the link showed photos and videos of the room, as I said, and it seemed harmless. But let's get back to the prize. The prize was $100,000. I first wondered, was it a prank or a joke, but I decided to give it a go. I mean, what harm could it do? The night came, and when I arrived there were 3 more people, a couple and a man. We started talking about how we were sent a link to take part and how we were reluctant in taking part. There was no one greeted us at the room. We were just sent a link on our phone that gave us a tracking device to give us GPS directions to get here. Then there was a room with a code to enter in the middle of an abandoned building. It was all really creepy. There didn't seem to be anything in the room, just 4 boxes and 4 TVs on the wall. I was wondering what it was all about. Then suddenly one of the TVs came on, and a person in a hood and mask came on the screen. Hello there, and welcome to the room. As you know, if ye stay here ye will win $100,000, and that is true, but there are just a few tasks that ye have to do first. There will be 3 of the TVs on the wall changed to a live stream in just under 2 minutes, and then you will see that I will give ye instructions on how ye can win your $100,000. And remember, ye can all win $100,000 each. Just follow simple instructions and the money is yours. Suddenly 3 of the other TVs came on, and a couple and a man were in shock when they saw what was on the screen. I could see my wife strapped to a chair, gagged, and the couple started screaming as they saw their 2 kids, a boy and a girl, strapped to a chair and gagged, and a man had been screaming about his wife, which also was strapped to a chair. The man spoke again. Well, I wasn't disappointed with the shocked reaction, but let me explain why ye are watching your loved ones attached to a chair. But before I do, I have a little surprise for you. Suddenly a masked figure walked up to each person in the videos. The man spoke again. What ye are watching is a video of your loved ones, and the people holding a gun to their head are ready to shoot them dead in just under 30 minutes. Unless ye do something very easy, just put the gun to your head and pull the trigger, and yes, the guns I will give ye are loaded. There is a box in front of ye, and your guns will be in there. Just pop in the code trigger happy, and your box will open, and then retrieve your gun. Remember, you have 30 minutes. Also, I'm going to throw ye a lifeline. If ye aren't up to killing yourself, then if you kill another person in the room, then your family will be free. Same as if you kill yourself. Your family will be free, and no harm will fall upon them. It's really easy and exciting, so let's start the game, shall we? We all stared at each other in shock, trying to take in what was happening. The man on his own spoke. What is this? I can't let my wife die. I said, don't do anything stupid. 10 minutes passed and no one shot themselves or each other. But after 15 minutes, the man shouted, I can't take this anymore, and pointed the gun to the man who was with his wife and shot him. Then he shot the man's wife. and then shouted, "I'm not a killer, but they're going to charge me for murder and put me in prison for a crime that I only did out of love for my wife." With that, the man shot himself in his head. I was standing alone in the room, in shock, wondering what would happen next. Then the man came on the TV again. "Congratulations. It looks like things worked out very well for you in this situation. Your wife will be freed and free to go." With that, the door of the room clicked open, and I walked out in shock and rang the police and explained. Luckily, I had secretly filmed the TVs with my phone and was able to show the police. My son was just 13 and walking out of a garage when one car bashed into another, and well, the first one went smashing into my son, killing him instantly. The car sped off, but I had the presence of mind to ask my friend Fred to wipe the CCTV, as I knew if the license plate numbers were given to the police, then the justice they would be served wouldn't in any way equal my justice. They might not even serve time. So luckily my friend Pat had a great idea. He would use his contacts to get their plates looked up, find out who they were, get them matched to the CCTV to make sure no one would be in the wrong. He had his gun loaded with 2 real bullets to shoot the couple, and the third one for himself, which was a fake bullet, which would blast him with fake blood. Very realistic. You might wonder how Pat had got away with it, since the police would be looking for his body. But that was all sorted. They did find his body, which was changed very fast after the couple were killed. Pat had used the mask of an addict we shot in the street. Pat had an amazing skill in creating lifelike prosthetic masks. The hardest thing about it was lifting the addict's body in. It was so heavy from the dead weight. I sat back, really happy with myself, and my wife happy also, knowing that me and Pat and her were the only ones that really knew what really happened in that room. I thought of the police watching the video, thinking they had evidence. That I was a victim traumatized that survived hell. Then I smiled and said to my wife, "It just goes to show, it's not always you can trust what you see." Then what about the gunmen who were holding the guns to the people's heads? Well, I've only 2 words. Deep fake.
I let myself go blind. When I was 25, I was told that my sight would fade away like a TV losing signal. Hard shapes would turn soft, and eventually they would be nothing but a current of running colors. Then black. More than black. Nothing. Hard to describe nothing. But that's what I see. But it didn't have to be this way. Not yet. If I was diligent with my medication, if I followed the set schedule and paid attention to the signs that my body was giving me, it could have been decades before I lost my sight. I could lead a full, happy life if I chose. That was 7 years ago. I never took a pill or went to an appointment. I never tried to save my eyes, and I was glad to have them rot. The food deliveries come weekly. Everything I need is brought right to my door, and the things I don't are taken care of without my having to step a foot in the hallway or even take my trash to the garbage chute. The world beyond my door is unknown. In my apartment, I know every inch of the floor, every corner, every bureau and coffee table. I can move around without a walking stick. I can even jog if my phone is ringing in a distant room. I have no fear of getting hurt like I did in the early days of my disability. I live here on my own. I am safe. I am content. When I do speak to people, on the rare occasion where I must, they always ask, what happened? But I can't tell them it was preventable. They wouldn't understand. I woke in the middle of the night. I had been in a deep sleep, but when I woke, I wasn't tired or groggy, but my heart was pushing against my chest in heavy thuds, like it was trying to break through the bones that kept it safe. I didn't remember having any bad dreams. Why was I so scared? Or was I? My body behaved as if I was terrified, but my mind had no way to place it. I lay there and hoped I would eventually be able to calm down. I forced myself to slow my breathing. I gripped the sheets under my grimy palms. It worked. The chills in my back warmed. My anxiety dripped from me in thick waves of sweat staining the mattress beneath me. Now that I could feel my body calm down, I felt something else. Something mundane. I had to pee. I smiled. A thought like that can only occur to somebody who's not in danger. It had all been in my head, some forgotten dream. So I hurried to the bathroom. Before I knew what happened, I was falling. My shins had smashed into something in the middle of the room. 3 of my fingers bent back and cracked beneath the weight of my body as I dropped to the floor. My head knocked against the hard wood, and for a moment I lost track of where I was. The pain in my hand was so blinding I could hardly think. But when I did think, when I did come back to my senses, body still throbbing, I only had one thought. The coffee table had moved. I didn't want to believe this. I didn't want to remember. But I knew. There was no mystery here. I knew who had done this. In a way, I'd been waiting for this day for a long time. I had been waiting for her. I picked myself up, the broken fingers cradled like a bloody claw in my hand, and limped crooked to the bathroom, careful not to run into anything else along the way. The apartment was foreign to me now. This was no longer a home. It was a foxhole. I locked the door and ran the cold water, letting it numb my hand. For a moment, the relief was so great, I almost forgot to be afraid. When that moment passed, I realized I hadn't checked the bathroom to make sure I was alone. I listened. She was here. I could hear the shower curtain blowing forward and easing back like a flag pushed by a chilled breeze. My heart locked like the first time I saw her. It was the clearest memory I had of my life before losing my sight. I was a child. My sister and I had been playing a game in the living room during a storm, which caused a blackout. Without TV, games were all we had to keep ourselves entertained. When we had finished all the regulars, ending with Battleship, it was time to go over something more substantial. We decided on finally finishing a full game of Monopoly, which meant I would have to go to the basement. I remember the sound of thunder, like some creature roaring in the dark. I could even smell the rain, but the storm didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid of anything at that age, not even the basement. The light was very bright since my father had replaced the single bowl with a set of fluorescent tubes. The stairs, which had once been rotting wood, were now metal steps, and the silver surface caught the white lights in such a way to make you feel like you were going down into a spaceship. The floor was cement, newly finished and bright gray. There was nothing to be afraid of. I moved to the shelf where the game sat and ran my fingers along the boxes until I found Monopoly. She was already there, sitting against the wall, holding her knees, her face buried between them. At first I wasn't afraid because I didn't understand. She wore a white dress, though the bottoms were caked in mud. I opened my mouth to speak. She lifted up her eyes to meet mine. They were full of tears and mourning. But when she saw me, she blinked the sadness away, and all that was left was hate. She stood. I ran up the stairs, screaming for my mom. When I told her what I'd seen, she took me by the hand and led me back down the stairs, pulling me by the wrist, nearly popping my shoulder out of the socket. With each step we took, the air in my lungs was taken from me as if we were going underwater, as if my mother was trying to drown me. She tried to explain. She knew there was no one here. She had already come down to the basement. She already checked every inch of it. It was empty, she told me. But I wouldn't let it go. I knew what I saw. And so she dragged me, screaming and wailing, down and down, one step at a time. And as we went, I looked to the corner where the woman had been. First I saw her feet, bare and bloodied, then the muddy dress, and the sharp nails spiking from each finger. "See?" my mother said, pointing to the woman. "There's no one here. Nothing. It's your imagination." I couldn't move. I only stared. When I said nothing, my mother let go of my hand and marched back up the stairs, mistaking my fear for resignation. She left me there on my own. And as soon as she was gone from sight, the woman in the basement attacked me. I spent weeks, sometimes months of my childhood in hospitals after that day, with doctors trying to understand my seizures. But how can a seizure break bones or leave scratches all over my body? I eventually stopped telling them what I saw. The medicine they gave me only made me drowsy. But it never stopped the attacks. And then one day, like a miracle from heaven, I was told I would go blind. No one understood my calm, my quiet acceptance. My friends begged me to take my medication, to take care of myself. But I knew that this was the only way to stop her from attacking me. She only came when I saw her, only when my eyes met hers. One by one, my friends fell away. I stopped leaving the house as my sight got worse, and I had no one to help me navigate the world beyond my door. The attack stopped. I was right. Or at least I had been until tonight. She was there, just behind me. I heard the crinkling of the plastic shower curtain, the broken exhale of the shallow breaths. Slow and steady as I could, I opened the bathroom door and limped my way through the living room, my legs brushing the coffee table I had tripped over. The door to the corridor outside my apartment was only 7 steps from where I stood. I imagined myself going through it, hurrying down the hall and the staircase. It had been so long since I stepped foot outside my apartment, I wasn't sure I could even find the stairs. And if I did, if I reached the street, I would have no one to call. Nowhere to go. I had so expertly separated myself from the world that I could find myself entirely alone, even on a crowded street. So I stood there, 7 steps from escape, and did not move an inch. The bathroom door creaked as it fell open. The floorboards whined closer and closer to me. "Why now?" I asked out loud. In that moment, I understood. This had been her plan. All my life I had been with people, From my parents to doctors, teachers, friends, I had never been alone. Not until I moved and let my sight fade. She had been waiting all these years while I cultivated a life of solitude, as if waiting for a fruit to ripen. She had been waiting for the moment when, even if I could run, I didn't have the knowledge or means to escape her. And even if I did, I had no one to call, no place to go. I had done this to myself. I had built a trap, and now, with ease and delight, she sprung it. Her chilled breath blew on my neck. Cold. It was ice cold.
We had heard about the sickness for weeks. Rumors of people dropping in the streets, being run over by carriages and left to rot. No one would touch them for fear of being infected. In just hours, whole villages were seeing symptoms, hundreds dead in days. I lived in a small farming village with my mother and father. We were secluded where we lived. There were only 4 houses spread over 20 miles. People from the cities would drift by on their way to safety and tell us what they'd heard about the fever. But no one else came after a while. Not even the mailman. A week, a month, 2 months passed, and we hadn't seen a soul. My father and mother decided to leave, but I told them I couldn't come. The family that lived on the last farm east was very dear to us, and they had small children. I told my mother I would go to see if they were okay and ask if they would come with me. After that, I would follow my parents south to where my aunt lived. Mother cried, but I would not be swayed. I watched them leave as the sun rose over the dirt road. I had a 20-mile walk in front of me, and so I began. There are those who doubt my story after this point. Some say I'm simply lying. Others speculate I had the fever and what I saw was only in my mind. I know I wasn't sick. I wish it was all a terrible hallucination, but I know what happened was real. It is midnight on the 3rd of November, 1723. I am a condemned woman. I am scheduled to be hanged in the morning. I have no reasons left to lie. This document will be seen only after I'm dead. Let this be my last testament. As I walked the path, I noticed a distinct silence in the trees. Sounds I had heard all my life were simply gone. And then I heard her. She was coming down the path. A smile arched across her face. She moved lightly, almost skipping. Not a care in the world. A large crimson stain sat dark at the frayed neck of her dress. Blood. "Are you okay, miss?" I asked as she passed by. It wasn't until she was only inches from me that I recognized her. The look in her eyes and that terrible smile made it hard for me to notice at first, but now I could see it was Mrs. Shannon. She lived on the farm closest to ours. She had never been one to smile. She didn't look at me when I talked to her, only continued to sing. I assumed then that she had the illness and her mind was gone. I watched her for a few minutes and then turned and kept going. After about a minute, I looked back. She stood about 100 yards away with her back to me. Her head was turned sideways, listening. I ran the rest of the way. I arrived at the house just as the sun began to set. I knew something was wrong as soon as I laid my eyes on it. There were no cows in the pasture, no goats. I jogged to the front door and knocked. Nothing inside moved. Flies buzzed in the kitchen where dirty dishes sat out exposed. Maggots slithered on the plates, finishing what was left of a week-old dinner. A trail of blood led to the back of the house where the bedrooms were. I moved slowly. The smell was even worse here. Mr. Peters lay on the floor beside the bed. His neck was torn and blood had pooled black beneath him. He'd been dead for days. Something moved in the closet. I hadn't seen the children. I had to check. Though I have to admit at this point I was terrified. I tried to keep quiet as I opened the door. It was the eldest, James. He was cowering in the corner. I took him to his room and gave him some of the water and food I had brought. I asked him what happened. He told me the whole story. A few weeks ago, a drifter had come to town with a fever. Mrs. Shannon let him stay in her barn. He told her it wasn't the illness that made him sick now, but that he had been attacked by a vampire on the road. She thought he was delirious. After he died, she and her husband buried him in the cemetery. A few days later, Mr. Shannon told his wife he had seen the man outside. The drifter said he needed his shoes. They had fallen off while they were transporting his body. After a few moments, the man left. For the next few days, they were plagued by knocks at their door during the night. One of these nights, Mr. Shannon had enough. He went out with his gun and told the man he would shoot him if he didn't go. The man began to laugh hysterically. Mrs. Shannon didn't see what happened, but when morning came, she went out and saw her husband dead on the ground. James told me that a few days prior to my arriving, Mrs. Shannon came asking for help. She said her husband had crawled out of his grave and was trying to get into the house. James's parents turned her away, thinking she was either sick or telling the truth. Either way, they were too scared to open the door. Mrs. Shannon returned not long after. That big grin, those wild eyes, she smelled of rot. She would come in the night, sing songs outside their windows. He told me his 8-year-old sister Elizabeth was the first to die. For reasons no one could understand, she had gone out of bed just before dawn and walked outside. He remembers having dreamt of a girl screaming for help. When he awoke, he realized the sounds were real. They found her a few hours later, sitting against a tree, a few yards into the woods. All the joints in her body had been twisted the wrong way. Before they buried her, his father bound her broken wrists with a rope and salted the earth above her. After a few days of hiding in the house, they ran out of supplies and decided to leave. His mother was killed while trying to gather goats. James and his father took their guns and searched the woods for the vampire, but there was no sign of it. They left her body where it fell and followed the road north. When night came, they found themselves surrounded. They would hear laughter coming from the forest and running feet cutting across the path behind them. James swears he heard his mother calling for him to come into the woods. In a panic, they headed back to the house. His father was briefly attacked along the way, and by the time they got inside, he was just barely breathing. I asked James if he knew who it was that had killed his father, and he told me it was his sister. 6 days after she died. In the end, I decided it didn't matter if it was true or not. James was weak and needed help. There were still usable supplies at my house. We had to leave. It's safer in the day, he told me. He wouldn't budge. He wouldn't let me bury his father either, but at least he let me put the body outside. The silence was still palpable. There were no crickets, not even a gust of wind to make me feel better. It was as if someone had taken our little village and cut it out from the rest of the world. Before I went back inside, I scanned the tree line expecting to see only darkness. There was a small purple dress obscured by low branches near the edge of the forest. At first I was elated. I could tell it was Elizabeth. She was caked in dirt. I thought because she had gotten lost in the woods and finally found her way out. I took a few steps toward her. She returned the favor and started walking to me. Her bones were all broken. She limped across the road like a puppet on strings. Each step she took would tear a new piece of flesh or crack another bit of bone. With absolute horror, I studied her face. She only smiled and held out her arms to me, wrists still bound. I ran back inside. James and I barricaded ourselves in the back bedroom and waited. I turned the lantern down to just barely a spark. We sat in the dark and listened. We heard his mother calling outside. James, Mommy's waiting. I could see the tears dripping down his cheeks. Elizabeth put her eyes between the cracks in the wood. Don't you miss us, brother? James begged her to leave. She said she would, but first she had to tell him something. He leaned in near the wall and she whispered in his ear. Then she left as promised. James sat without saying a word. He picked up the lantern and raised the flame. I asked if he was okay. He opened the globe and poured the oil down his throat. In seconds, he was covered in flames. I screamed. I wanted to help him, but there was no way. The room was overcome in just moments. I rushed to escape. Smoke filled every inch of the space. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. By the time I stumbled outside, it was almost dawn. I was so overcome by the smoke in my lungs that I lost consciousness. When I awoke, there was nothing left of the house or of James. A gash ran across my wrist. I had lost a lot of blood in the night, but I could still move. I tore a piece of my dress and wrapped the wound. When I could walk, I wandered north towards the closest town. Somewhere along the way, I heard the light and ringing of a tiny bell. I came across a cemetery and saw that the bell I was hearing was from a grave. Someone inside was pulling it as if to say they had been buried alive. I walked to it, and as I did, another bell began to ring. Then another and another. I ran and never looked back. I thought I'd hurt my wrist while leaving the house, but now I realize that while I was unconscious lying on the grass, they fed. In a few hours, I'll be put to death for something I did not do. The people here think themselves civilized. They don't believe in monsters. I tried to warn them, but they won't listen, won't take precautions. They'll bury me tonight, and tomorrow morning, I'll be ringing my own bell.
Dig deeper at sessionsx.tumblr.com.